Hello and welcome back to Film on High Reviews. I'm
This
Alex,
is Dex.
and today we're going to be talking about the 1995 crime film Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead, directed by Gary Fleeter, starring Andy Garcia, Christopher Lloyd, Bill Nunn, William Forsythe, Treat Williams, Christopher Walken, Steve Buscemi, Gabrielle Anwar, and Fairuza Balk. The film tells the story of Jimmy the Saint Tosnia, a former gangster living in the city of Denver who is making an attempt to go straight, but is contacted by a quadriplegic crime boss he used to work for who goes by the rather ridiculous moniker of the man with the plan. He requests that Jimmy does a relatively simple job for him, something he calls an action, and Jimmy decides to recruit four of his best friends from prison to do this job. And of course, it goes awry, and our plucky band of misfits struggles to survive as their fates close in on them. So, what did you think of Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead?
It's a very hard movie. It's not a hard movie to describe, but it's hard to wrap your brain around once you get to the finish line of this film. And you think about it for a second, and you're just left with confusion, disappointment, a little bit of anger, and overall just feeling like not wasted time, but you learn something about this film that, okay, there are movies where it may be something that, as you said, may be a tax break. There are movies that someone greenlit and could have gone over a second draft or a third draft, but yeah,
Well,
it's bad.
yeah, it's bad. Well, Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead is both an interesting film and a very kind of mundane film. It came out in a particular era, the post kind of Tarantino era. Tarantino was coming off Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, obviously, and this film was even produced and released by the same studio that released Pulp Fiction, and, the Weinsteins had their hands in it. But even though the film was often kind of dismissed as a Tarantino clone by a lot of reviewers, the writer Scott Rosenberg claims that he actually wrote the script years before Tarantino broke big, so, make of that if you will, what you will. But it's kind of obvious that even though the script may have been written before Tarantino came to prominence, the reason the movie was sort of made was because of Tarantino, like when Tarantino got big, all of a sudden the studios were kind of all pulling up like whatever crime scripts, quirky sort of weird criminal stories and just putting them out there. So you ended up with, like a lot of low rent copies of, trying to imitate that particular Tarantino style. This one kind of stands out in some ways, at least from that whole sea of Tarantino, rip-off movies. It has a pretty diverse and strong cast, like I listed in the beginning there. There's a lot of really recognizable actors here. And the script does attempt to have its own kind of peculiar rhythm and language to it. Like, they built in a lot of weird slang. Like, for example, terms like mammy rammer, buckwheats, fecal eater, Dange, like, so, and like terms like give it a name, which is like a term that the gangsters use. Like, on one hand, I sort of commend the writer for trying to create like his own like criminal lexicon, trying to do something a bit different, but there are definitely moments where it comes across really forced and really silly. Like, there's like really bad attempts at tough guy dialogue, and like, another thing to mention is the title of the film, which is pretty long and unwieldy. The title actually comes from a song by Warren Zevon, he was a pretty great songwriter, passed away, I think about 10 years ago, something like that, 20 years ago. And he was a great songwriter, and you can just tell that the guy, you almost get this picture of like the writer sitting in a bar drinking, and then the song comes on the jukebox, and he's like, I'm gonna write a fucking movie based on that song, dude. It's gonna be so cool. And there are like some musical references, like I think the name Jimmy the Saint comes from like a Bruce Springsteen song, things like that. Like he kind of took like all these like sort of cool references and threw them in a blender, and like it's it sort of works in like its own kind of awkward way, but the problem is that the film ties itself into knots with a really silly, convoluted plot.
You said it there, just because what I was expecting from this film was, yes, okay, I'm going along with the ride. There are a lot of decisions that are made that are a sane person would have thought about it and would have gone about it a whole different way, but we needed to get to a point where, okay, these guys are going to mess up, they're going to fuck up, and now they are being hunted, so these 4 ex-gangsters that, maybe, as you mentioned, like low level or mid level or something like that.
Yeah.
I get giving a quirk to a character, but there's sometimes maybe just a little bit too extreme.
Yeah, and the characters and the names, oh boy, we should get into that. But yeah, like one issue the film kind of has, the writer almost couldn't decide whether he wanted to do more of a character piece or a plot-driven crime film. And as a result, it feels somewhat uneven and weird, but like... So right off the bat, in terms of plot, the movie gets off to like on a weird, sort of creepy and tasteless note where we have a scene of this really creepy older guy approaching a playground where a bunch of children are playing, and then he attempts to force himself on one of the young girls on the playground, and so right off the bat you're kind of like, this is kind of fucking weird.
Yeah.
And then the movie starts off, and for a while you're kind of wondering what the relevance of this is to the plot, as we're kind of introduced to Jimmy the Saint, ex-gangster played by Andy Garcia. He now has this business where it's really kind of weird, but like he does this thing where he videotapes like the last messages of people who are dying, like people who are terminally ill, I guess, so they can leave them for like their families or whatever. Like, I guess there is kind of a market for that, but then again, you could pretty much just do that yourself, especially, well, maybe in the 90s when the movie was made, it was less common, but nowadays you could just do that yourself with whatever equipment you have. But anyway, he has this business, it's not doing too well, and even though he's an ex-gangster, he took like money out from the mob and went into debt to them. So he's called in by this gangster, the man with the plan. I fucking hate that name. Played by Christopher Walken, who's in, like, really kind of creepy, like, Christopher Walken especially is really kind of over the top in this film, but he does it without even, like, just sitting down the whole time, because he's playing a character who's paralyzed, so he's just in his wheelchair, and he's got his attendants and the gangsters and, like, his sexy nurse who's looking after him. Like, you could tell that, like, Walken was just kind of sinking his teeth into the role and having a lot of fun and being really sort of creepy and weird. But it turns out that he's the father of the creepy guy we saw in the opening who was at the playground. And he calls Jimmy in, and he proceeds to outline the most bizarre and harebrained scheme I think I've ever seen. So basically his logic is that his son, Bernard, had an ex-girlfriend named Meg, and when he was with Meg, he was doing well, he was normal, but then Meg broke up with him and got a new guy, and ever since then, Bernard was acting weirder and weirder, and I guess the man with the plan believes that him being dumped by Meg is what led to him becoming this weirdo who creeps on children. I don't know. But he seems convinced that if he stops Meg from marrying this new guy, he can somehow convince her to come back to Bernard, and then Bernard will just magically be okay again. So this is a pretty ridiculous fucking idea in and of itself, but okay. So he recruits Jimmy to basically do this thing where they're going to stop the guy, the new boyfriend, and intimidate him into backing off. So he offers Jimmy 50 grand to do this, and then Jimmy, I guess out of the spirit of camaraderie and loyalty, he decides to get 4 of his oldest jail buddies in on this, who are, I will name them in order. There's Big Bear Franchise, played by William Forsythe. There's Pieces, played by Christopher Lloyd, who has that name because he suffers from some disease, apparently leprosy, that's made his fingers rot off. Pieces of him are falling off. There's Critical Bill, played by Treat Williams. And there's Easy Wind, played by Bill Nunn. So we have these 4 kind of colorful characters with really silly names. And they're all kind of ex-gangsters like Jimmy. They were all in prison together, so they have this kind of camaraderie, this code, this way of talking to each other, like the whole boat drinks thing where they touch each other's hands, and we find out later that it's a thing like in the jailhouse, like when they were together they would all look forward to going out on a boat and having drinks together. Whatever. And another like weird trick that the movie employs is there's this old guy like in the malt shop who's narrating the movie and giving the information on all the characters as we go along. Like, I guess that sort of works, but it begs the question of why he would even be doing this. But also, they also kind of overplay their hand because throughout the movie they have the video testimonials from Jimmy's business of like the sick people giving their last messages playing through the film. And I guess that's supposed to be poignant and make you reflect on death, but it just comes across pretty silly and ridiculous. Anyway, so we got our 4 characters together, and of course, with this gang of like ridiculous guys, it's gonna go wrong, and it does, predictably. And yeah, like the problem right there is you have these 5 guys, but you don't really get to know them that well. Like, there was potential here with like the camaraderie, and these guys, they obviously have a history together, but the movie doesn't really explore that as well as it could have. Like, instead we just kind of dive right into this ridiculous kind of plot, this scheme that the man with the plan put them in on. And like, I feel like he was trying, it's almost like he was doing the wrong movie, you know what I mean? Like, instead of doing all that bullshit, he should have just had the movie be about these guys, and like, maybe had them, like, you could have done a lot with that, but instead, like, no, they just fuck up the job, and then it's kind of them waiting for the man with the plan to basically send an assassin after them and knock them all off. And another thing that kind of messes with the pacing of the movie are the entanglements in Jimmy the Saint's love life, where on one hand he has this kind of burgeoning romance with this young woman named Dagny that he met at a bar, and he seems to be into her, but it's the classic thing of I'm a gangster and I'm too into my thing and blah blah blah, torn between 2 worlds. And he also has another thing with like a local sex worker, a prostitute named, I think her name is Lucinda, played by Freiruza Balk. And they're not quite like romantically involved, but they kind of have this weird flirty thing where she's into him and he occasionally gives her money and whatever. Like, these 2 plots don't work very well, especially the Dagny one. Like, there's so much bland, stereotypical bullshit, like cliched dialogue, and it's never fully convincing, and you never really care about it. And again, it's really detracting from the other stuff. He could have made use of these other characters and their dynamic, and that would have made the movie a lot more interesting at the very least,
That's the thing. There's this one really cool shot in the film that I really liked with the character Jimmy talking to one of the lieutenants for the man with the plan. And it had this kind of brilliant neon type of lighting where all of them were just in shadows and stuff, and things were going on. And it made me think about the film where I wish it would have just, as you mentioned, been a story about just these 4 guys in a debt, hunted down, and with the whole buckwheat type of method of killing people, which is a whole other thing we'll get into. But essentially with these characters, you could have fleshed them out a little bit more, and with what we were given, it's just it's something that you have to think about and understand. This is not a good movie. This is not a good written movie, but it's well shot movie. It's a movie where you can kind of follow the pace of it. You can kind of understand, okay, this plot connects to this plot connects to this plot, but
It's a lot of
detective story would have been maybe a little bit better.
not even that. Like, just make a movie about the fucking guys doing crimes together or chilling together. Like, make it
Like
a standard,
noir.
like,
That's what I
yeah,
mean. Yeah.
kind of noir type movie. Instead, they were trying to do, like, the movie tries too hard to be cool. It tries too hard to be clever. It tries too hard to make these, like, profound statements about death. Like, I think the screenwriter, like, I read on IMDb that he was writing the script after his father passed away from cancer, so maybe that's kind of what inspired it, and I get that, but like, yeah, like, they fuck up the job, things go bad, people end up dying, and the man with the plan, at first he's willing to spare Jimmy because they have personal history, but he declares that the four other members of Jimmy's crew are going to die via buckwheats, which, again, this seems to be another fucking weird, perverse thing that the writer came up with. I've never heard about it in real life, but a buckwheat is basically a very painful execution. Like, it's done in a way that's designed to be very slow, and a common method of performing a buckwheat, we're told in the film, is to shoot someone in the ass. Which, again, feels like so childish and sort of silly. Like, this movie has flashes of brilliance, and then there's a bunch of other stuff that just feels like it was fucking written by a 13-year-old. Like, but yeah, so now there's this urgency where the four guys are like, okay, this is bad, and the man with the plan calls in the worst, like, the scariest fucking hitman, Mr. Shush, who's played by Steve Buscemi, of all people, which is pretty funny to see Buscemi playing this, like, really ice-cold hitman. It's not 100% believable, but again, like, the movie almost feels like this comic book fucking crime story, so by that point, you just go with it, you know, by the time he's introduced in the story.
That is something. Yeah, it does feel like a comic book.
It sort of does, with, like, really over-the-top, like, broad characters, like, it's in between, like, you know, realism and, like, just that kind of, like, old school Pulp Fiction style, like, I don't know, like, it's a weird mix, and it never fully comes off as, like, wholly satisfying. Like, it's a movie that was trying to do different things, it was trying to, like, have a message about death, I guess, or, you know, whatever, but it just feels a bit too scattered, a bit too disorganized. And there are, like, some interesting characters, some strong performances. Like, Andy Garcia, I'm not a huge fan of his. I don't think he was really the kind of guy you should have had to anchor this movie. And a lot of, like, the romance sequences don't work with him and Gabrielle Anwar and stuff like that. But, like, the main crew of guys, like, they have pretty decent chemistry together, and the kind of implied history they have, like, you want to see more of that, but of course the film never really pays that off. Christopher Walken is great, kind of playing his, you know, he's great at playing roles like this. He could walk in and do this with his eyes closed. So there's definitely, like, some interesting elements here and some strong stuff, but it just gets bogged down with, like, yeah, kind of a convoluted plot and silly dialogue, cartoonish set pieces. Like, it's kind of a shame because, yeah, I feel like it could have been better. Strong cast and everything. Like, it's kind of been forgotten now. Like, it really bombed when it came out. It made like $500,000 back on an $8 million budget. So, yeah, but I have seen some people stick up for it. Like, I've seen some people claim it's like a hidden gem. And, yeah, like, I could see this as a movie that, like, maybe some people saw it when it came out and they see it as, like, this cool little underrated crime gem. It's definitely kind of offbeat and weird in its own way, but yeah, unfortunately it never, like, comes together or pays off, like, the potential of the premise in a way that's wholly satisfying.
Yeah, there's a good movie in there. But
yeah, buried beneath the bullshit.
Exactly, and if you sift through all the fat and the whole type of carcass that it is that we've got, essentially, yes, maybe with a different casting, more specifically with the main actor and a different storyline for his whole story type of thing. It could have maybe been a movie kind of
The Usual Suspects kind of thing, like a grimier version of that, like focusing on these guys pulling crimes.
You know,
that would have been a better thing, yeah.
But also have a tinge of dark comedy into it, because with the aesthetics that they were trying to show, it had really good vibrant colors. The set pieces that they had were pretty good for a place like Denver. And if you had gone with the direction of with the quirks that these characters have and make it believable for the audience, so that it's not the he's psycho, so we're gonna show that he's really psycho, or this guy has got a malady or disease that it shows that he's dying, and we're really gonna show it. It's like, just subdue it.
Well, yeah, there was potential there with these characters. Like, they should have made it more of an ensemble kind of black comedy noir, instead of trying to make it like this pretentious meditation on life and death. Like, yeah, that didn't wholly work in the movie's favor, but it's still kind of like a quirky little gem. It's a good like hangout movie to put on. You can put it on in the background and kind of half pay attention to it. It's got like some kooky dialogue and some silly characters. Like, I would recommend it if you're like into this kind of movie, if you're like into like weird crime, like that kind of like 90s, like specifically sort of Tarantino influenced movie. This might be worth tracking down, but like, yeah, it's definitely not a masterpiece. Like, you can see why it's kind of been forgotten. I would like give it like maybe, I guess, a 2 out of 5, like kind of middling. Like, not the worst movie I've ever seen, flashes of promise, but like, yeah, on the whole, kind of a mess, kind of a letdown.
Yeah, I would also give it a 2 out of 5. Just, there are some flashes of goodness, there's flashes of really good scenes where you're kind of thinking about, what if this movie was like this way? And you don't really want a movie to do that to you,
Like, just have the guys, like, go on the run, like, hiding out from the man with the plan as he sends hitmen at them. That would have been more interesting, and they sort of do that, but again, it's more like Jimmy, like, he tries to convince them all to run, but they've all got different reasons, and, like, there's... I don't know. Like, I kind of see what he was going for, and at the end, they try to be poignant, where it's more about Jimmy kind of accepting his own fate, but like, by that point, like, you've thrown so much silliness at me. Like, when you have a fucking character named Critical Bill, who's like a fecal eater and stuff like that, like, you can't try to make me, like, give me a serious, like, speech about death at the end and have it be, like, serious and moving. Like, nah, by that point, you've already committed to being, like, too silly. Like, they should have ridden that train and stayed on that.
Basically.
Yeah.
So, anyways, have you seen the movie? What'd you think about it? Let us know in the comments. And honestly, with a type of movie like this, it makes you kind of appreciate the really gritty type of, noir types of films or crime type of movies. But until then, it's been Film on High.
Peace.
Later.